I think everyone's been there before. It's those moments when you feel like you're watching your behavior and you know it's terrible, but you don't feel capable of changing it. Hello, and welcome to the Complex Couples Podcast. I'm Heidi. I'm a couples therapist and relationship coach specializing in mixed orientation marriages and mixed gender identity relationships. Whether you're just discovering this reality or you've been on this journey for a long time, this is the space where your marriage matters, your values matter, and your choices matter. Let's dive in. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Complex Couples Podcast. I'm really excited to be here today and discussing a new topic. It feels like the last couple of topics have been kind of heavy, so I'm choosing something a bit lighter today. It's not that light. We talk about a lot of heavy topics. I think that's part of the purpose of this podcast, but it's something that a lot of people bump up against, and I'll tell you, I just want to start with a story of me bumping up against this. So a couple of weeks ago, I was meeting with a couple in my office, and in this session, there just some things felt off, and I could tell what I was saying wasn't really landing with the client, and things were a little off. And so after the session, I really took some time to think about what was going on between us, what was happening. I have the advantage of I record my sessions so that I can reflect on them and see things more clearly. Sometimes that's easier than seeing things in the moment. And so I watched some of the video, and I wish we all had video cameras in our lives. I really do. Not to catch other people, but to catch ourselves and how we're behaving. Because so many times when I think that there's something that my client was doing that I was reacting to, which is true, like they are doing things that I'm reacting to, but I also think I'm responding differently than I really am. And this was no exception. When I watched the video, I started seeing myself differently in how I was engaging with them. And I started to get really discouraged because, first of all, as a therapist, I feel like I'm supposed to know what to do. And sometimes it's not very fun to see that I'm still human and I make mistakes, but that's just the reality. I can't avoid that. I can't leave that behind. So anyway, I started to see some of the mistakes that I was making in this session that were getting me entangled with the client in a bit of a disagreement. And I really started down the shame spiral of, man, gosh, why do I still mess up like this? I should be better than this. Kind of this shaming words that were coming to mind. And I was talking to a colleague about the kind of the shame spiral I was in. And as we were talking, I started realizing how I was engaged in something that was very normal and I was criminalizing it. And I think that that is something that we do a lot in our marriages. So what I mean by that is relationships are rupture and repair. And therapy is no exception to that. Therapy is a relationship. So there are going to be ruptures. No human is perfect. Every human will make mistakes. And that is the nature of relationships. So if you are one of those people who feel like something's going wrong because you're fighting a lot, I think it's important to take a closer look. And one of the first things I think it's important to note is that conflict is not the problem, okay? Conflict is actually a good sign in many relationships. I know that's hard to believe, but here's the thing. It indicates that you care to some degree about what the other person thinks of you. If you didn't care at all, you would just disengage entirely. So often people think the opposite of love is hate. Someone once told me the opposite of love is not hate, it's apathy. And I agree with that statement. So the fact that you're engaging in conflict, as much as it doesn't feel good, it can indicate that there's some caring going on. You're just doing it in pretty messed up ways. So the conflict isn't the problem, but how you navigate the conflict matters. It really, really matters to your own self-respect and to your relationship. So if you're fighting a lot, don't panic, but also most of us don't want to be in a relationship where there is fighting all the time. We want something better. We want something where there's not heated arguments or escalations that are happening. So if you want to get better, you need to focus on doing better rupture, so to speak, better conflict and repairing. and recognize that that is a natural part of every relationship. So, one of the first things that I think is important when you're navigating conflict, and I'm not going to dive into all of them today. That would be impossible. I will give you a resource during this podcast that I hope will be helpful to you, but this is going to be pretty short today. One of the things that you need to be willing to look at is, how do I behave when I'm stressed, when I'm feeling overwhelmed? David Schnarch referred to this as a regressed state. And again, I don't want to go into all the details, so I'm going to give you the name of his book. If you're interested, you can look more into it. I will put a link to this in the show notes, but this is a free PDF, so anyone can download it for free. It was the last book that David wrote before he died, and it had not been published, and so it has been released just as a free PDF, which is amazing because it's a really great book. But I would encourage you to look at that book, and I'm starting about page 145 of Living at the Bottom of the Ocean, talking about his analogy of the Mariana Trench. So some of you may have heard this talked about as maybe a fight, flight, freeze response. I think that would be similar to what David would refer to as a regression. It's those moments when we're not at our best and we revert to like whatever we can do to just get by, just to survive. And he compares it to being at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. He does a lot better job at this than I do. But when we get down into that deep, deep, dark part of the ocean, and I think everyone's been there before, when it's those moments when you feel like you're watching your behavior and you know it's terrible, but you don't feel capable of changing it. And you engage in ways that you know are destructive. So he compares that to being an ugly fish at the bottom of the ocean. So if you've ever watched Finding Nemo, you know what that ugly fish looks like, right? You've got a cute little Nemo fish, and then you have the anglerfish that is terrifying looking. And essentially when we get regressed, that's kind of how we look, like this ugly fish at the bottom of the ocean. And it's easy to say, well, it's because of, and blame it on everyone else, the reason that we got to this state. And the reality is, it is important to look at the reason we are regressing, because sometimes it's going to help us deal with issues that really need to be dealt with. It's just that when we're an ugly fish, we're not interested in resolving anything. We're just interested in protecting. And essentially, he says an ugly fish just eats and attacks and survives. And so we want to get out of that ugly fish state. And the question is, how do we do that? How do we get up from the bottom of the ocean, from that ugly fish state, so that we can actually connect with people and do something deeper in our relationships? And David's answer is really simple. He says, you swim for the surface as hard as you can. And essentially, if you care about being a person who doesn't yell, then you find ways to manage your emotions that don't involve yelling. You swim for the surface, you find out what's wrong, you figure it out so that you can function at a higher level. And to some degree, a big impact on how deep down in the ocean we are can be trauma. He talks about the difference between a steady state regression or an acute regression. So an acute regression is more in the moment. It happens to us all of the sudden when we're reacting to something, and we kind of have an acute regression and get angry. But a steady state regression is different. It's more when we think we're functioning at a different level than we are because it's the best we know. An example of that is, for the longest time, I'd been to therapy, I'd been in grad school, I'd been learning all these tools and all these things that I could implement in my marriage. And I really thought I was doing it right. And I had a therapist who was leading me to believe that I was, quote, doing it right. I was doing all the right things, and it was just my husband was this problem. Well, I started to really see something differently when I saw a different therapist engaging with a difficult human. And when I watched her engage in a very collaborative way, I realized that was not what I was doing at all. But because of my steady state regression, my experiences in my life and what I had seen, I had never seen someone who functioned at that high of a level. And so it was pretty difficult to implement when I'd never seen it myself. And I think that's why I like this analogy, because in the Mariana Trench, if you're really, really deep, you can't even see the sunlight. You don't even know what you're missing. So I understand I'm not giving you concrete tools here to kind of get out of the trench. What I'm hoping to highlight is how important it is. And I'm hoping that you will decide that you want to get out of it. No matter what your spouse does, no matter what your children do, that you don't want to live in the Mariana Trench anymore. And figuring out what it is necessary for you to pull up your functioning and to respond to the people you love like people you love. Now, you might be saying to yourself, but you haven't seen my spouse. I don't respond like that at all. When I get mad, I get really quiet. I don't misbehave and lash out at people. And maybe I close off or do other things. Well, the reality is we just all regress different ways. For the longest time, I viewed my husband as much higher functioning than I was because he was more of that calm personality. He looked calmer when he got regressed. When he gets stressed, actually, his heart rate almost goes down. He's so good at to some degree, suppressing emotion and feeling, and he looks very, very different when he's regressed than I do. And it wasn't until another mentor pointed out to me that we all handle those regressions differently that I recognized, like, oh, we both get regressed. So I don't know how you're doing it, but if you want to get better at conflict, you're going to have to bring yourself up from those acute regressions and start to actually confront some of the things in yourself that you have a hard time with. So once you've kind of figured out what's going on for you, you've taken a look at it, you've calmed yourself down, you've gotten clear on what's bothering you, you're going to be able to handle a conversation about that much better. And you're going to be able to stay in the conversation, not have to leave it because you'll be settled. Now, that doesn't mean you might not need some periodic breaks from the conversation. When conflict is overwhelming, it's not a bad thing to take breaks, but you need to come back to it because otherwise you miss the repair. And that's a really, really important thing in navigating marriage. I really think that one of the gifts of monogamous relationships is that if our sexual relationship is functioning in a really healthy way, we are going to engage in it honestly. Meaning, if there are things in our way that haven't been resolved, if there hasn't been a repair, we might be more hesitant to engage in a sexual manner. And so it pushes us to confront our weakness in figuring out what went wrong so we can repair it. I know I'm giving a broad overview here. The biggest thing I want you to take away is that if you're fighting a lot, it doesn't mean your marriage is over, but it might mean you need to get better at conflict and repairing. I'm going to give you one small example. I hope you find it useful, even though it's small. So one of the things that I mentioned in an episode a few weeks ago with my husband was that I started to learn that defensiveness and anger was a protector of something more vulnerable, right? So as I learned that, generally what would happen is if he got defensive, then I escalated, I got mad, I retaliated. But I decided, okay, if that's true, I want to deal with that differently. I want to deal with that protector of defensiveness differently. And so I really started to think about when that shows up, when the defensiveness shows up, how do I want to engage with it? Well, and that forced me to back it up a little further. Like, am I doing something to cause the defensiveness? And one of the things that sometimes I would do was I would ask questions, but they were really accusations. And so I decided if I didn't want to flare up that defensiveness, I'd probably have to deal with that I wasn't asking questions from a curious standpoint. I was actually asking them to judge. So then I would go into a conversation very conscientiously with my husband, like, what do I want to talk about? What is hard for me here? And what might be going on for him so that I could be more curious and more forthcoming with what I was thinking. So then I would do that. And guess what? it was sometimes still met with defensiveness. So the way I would respond to that would be to say something like this: I can see you're getting really defensive right now, and I'm wondering if I'm contributing to that defensiveness in some way. I feel like I'm trying to be non-accusatory and to be curious, but it's possible I'm slipping into old ways. So is there something that I'm missing there? And first of all, that immediately caused a softening because I was looking at myself first to see what I was doing that might be contributing. And that self-reflection alone took my husband off guard a bit. And then he was much more willing to look at, like, why am I getting defensive? And that wasn't the end of the story, but it was one thing that helped. So I hope that that is helpful for you. And I hope that this week you'll try it. Next time you start feeling very justified in whatever behavior you're engaging in, remind yourself that is helping you become an ugly fish. And instead of justifying it, look at, how do I want to respond to this that is different? And swim for the surface as fast as you can. Now, this is going to take practice, and it's going to take effort to figure out what's going on for you. And it's not going to be a one-time thing, but I encourage you to take yourself on in this way and to figure out ways to engage in conflict that are less rupturing so that you can have quicker repair. It's a process. Be kind to yourself. One of the things that I recognized as I was heading into that shame spiral when thinking about my clients was that this really is a process over time. Remember that we do have to repair because we're imperfect and we show up imperfectly. But what I've learned is the really good things that can come from repair. When I take that into a client and I'm open with them about the mistakes that I made, and I also am able to see, like, the ways that they get stuck in conflict because I saw how they did it with me, it's so helpful. So it's not the end. It's data. It's all information that's going to help you. So if you can look at it like data instead of going into the shame spiral and swim for the surface, right? You're going to be able to do this differently. And as you do it, remember your value does not come from how well you do it. It just comes from being you. You're valuable no matter what. And as you do it, you're going to feel better about the person that you're becoming. If this was helpful, I hope you'll visit my website, www.complexcouplescoaching.com, or you can email me, Heidi@complexcouplescoaching.com. I'd love to hear from you, and I look forward to being with you next time on the Complex Couples podcast.